to all of my colleagues and our guest presenters, as well as those of you who have joined us out in the audience today for our very first kickoff for the 134th General Assembly Ohio Legislative Children's Caucus meeting. We do hold these monthly and cover a number of topics. I just want to say I'm very excited to start in this new General Assembly with both new members as well as new leadership on caucus. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Ohio Legislative Children's Caucus was reestablished really in 2019 in the 133rd General Assembly. It is a bipartisan, bicameral caucus. We are devoted to using our voice and our power as legislators to champion children's issues through the legislative process with meaningful legislation, advocating with the governor and the administration, as well as looking for ways through the budgetary process and budgetary action, which is what we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on today, talking about how we can advance a whole child budget. I do want to start by saying and introducing my new co-chair, Senator Stephanie Kunze, who I'm going to turn it over to in just a minute to give a few comments. And also this year that is new with the Children's Caucus, we also have new vice chairs. We have Representative Susan Manchester as well as Senator Vernon Sykes. So I think we have a fantastic leadership team. We have close to 40 members between the House and the Senate. Those of you who have signed on are members. So we welcome you. We are excited to launch into this new General Assembly, and especially early in this budget process, to really be strong advocates for children in the state of Ohio. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Kunze, to say a few words, and then we'll start by introducing our guest speakers.
Thank you so much, Representative Russo. It's just really an honor and a privilege to join you today, as well as with Senator Vern Sykes, who's going to be the vice chair on the Senate side, and of course, Rep. Susan Manchester on the House side. And I just wanted to say, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have participated in last General Assembly's Children's Caucus, the work that you and Senator Lehner did to really lay and rebuild the foundation for the Children's Caucus. We're just really excited to get started with the 134th General Assembly and really dive into the budget process, looking at how we can benefit children in a whole child aspect, and also from pre-birth all the way to hopefully helping them find their God-given talents and interests, and really providing them with a way of staying here in Ohio and growing our families, our communities, and really contributing back into the state. So I'm just excited, and I'm really, really grateful to join you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kunze. That was a fantastic segue into what is going to be the topic of this first kickoff presentation, which is looking at our state budget process and the state budget agenda, and thinking in how we can use that as a tool to support our children in the state of Ohio and give them and their families the tools needed to have good outcomes and to thrive in this state. When we met before at the beginning of this General Assembly, Senator Kunze and I really, gave some thought to, we have a lot of potential power within this caucus. And what are some large umbrellas? There are many issues certainly that we could focus on in this space, but what are some large umbrellas and large topics that we hope that we can tackle? And so that's how we've laid out the presentation today. And we came up with number one, how do we ensure the continuum of care for mothers and babies, and thinking about that issue. So we're going to have some discussion around that today. How do we foster high quality early childhood education and child care? And we'll have some our friends from Groundworks Ohio from Policy Matters Ohio talking about that issue. One of the big topics that we've dealt with in this state for decades has been how do we implement equitable K through 12 school funding model, and we certainly spent a lot of time in the last General Assembly and anticipate doing the same in this General Assembly. Finally, how do we support the social and emotional well-being of our children and families, which has been so critically important, especially as we've gone through this pandemic this year. So those are the big umbrella topics that I try to frame today's discussion around. And I'm going to start with Tracy Nájera, who is the Executive Director from the Children's Defense Fund of Ohio. And she's going to talk a little bit about the Ohio Children's Budget Coalition and their advocacy work that they are going to be doing for the whole child budget agenda. And then I'm going to introduce some of our other guest speakers as we go through each of the presentations. I do ask for our members and our legislative staff, if you will hold your questions, we're going to have plenty of time at the end to have a discussion and ask each of our panelists follow-up questions. So there will be an opportunity for that at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Russo, and thank you, Senator Coonsey and Senator Sykes and Representative Manchester for your leadership of the Children's Caucus. We so appreciate it. So I am here to talk a little bit about the Children's Budget Coalition and our vision for what child well-being should look like here in Ohio. So just to start off with, we have this saying that children don't come in pieces. Neither should our budget and our policy decisions in this state. And with children depending on the decisions and, what adults do on their behalf, it's so important, that we all recognize that, children don't necessarily just need one particular thing. They need many different to experience whole child well-being. So though they also just represent about 20% of our population, here in Ohio, they're absolutely 100% of our future. So we are a coalition of 19 organizations that have come together around this vision. And we also have a series of policy and issue briefs that we've published just to demonstrate, this vision of child well-being. And I will leave it there. Now, Representative Russo, did you want me to talk about a little bit more, or did you want to go through and introduce all the speakers first?
Thank you, Tracy. Sure, I'm happy to go through and introduce our speakers. So we are going to have Lynn Gutierrez, who is the Assistant Director and Legal Counsel for Groundwork Ohio. She's really going to talk about this issue of the continuum of care for mothers and infants and children, and some of the potential in the state budget to support those efforts. Next, presenting after that will be Will Petrick, who is the budget researcher for Policy Matters Ohio, and he's really going to focus on this issue of how do we support high quality early childhood education and childcare. As we have learned again through this pandemic, the role of early childhood education and childcare has been so critically important in supporting our economic infrastructure and allowing folks to get back to work. We call them the workforce behind the workforce. And then finally, we're going to have Scott Demara, who is president of the Ohio Education Association, and talking to us about some of the key recommendations for K through 12 education and school funding, which is a topic that we spent a lot of time on in the last General Assembly and hope to have some good movement on in this General Assembly. So with that, I think, Tracy, I'm not sure if you're going to be saying more, or if Lynn Ann, I'm going to turn it over to her.
Yes, I think I'm going to be going first, and then we'll proceed with the next speaker. So I just want to mention one more thing about the Children's Budget Coalition before I dive into social emotional learning. The speakers that we have today are also members of the Children's Budget Coalition, and we are just so thrilled that they have all come together to partner and collaborate on, the fact that children need housing and nutrition and education, all of these things to thrive and flourish into adulthood. So I'm very excited to be here with my colleagues. So the first thing that we're going to be speaking about is social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health priorities for children and families in Ohio's budget. So just to start with, we have seen and experienced significant challenges in the past 10 months with children and their behavioral health. And even before this pandemic, we were experiencing a lot of challenges as well. And for those reasons, this legislature, the administration, they implemented a number of initiatives to support children during this time and to support children while they were at school, to support their well-being in a variety of ways. Now, one thing that we have noticed and we've realized is that we need to implement more tools and get a greater data detail in terms of gauging their mental and behavioral health needs here in Ohio. So though we have surveys that go out periodically, and some counties do a wonderful job of figuring out, how children in their region are doing, a more concerted effort needs to be done statewide. So just for example, there are some wonderful tools here in Ohio that can help us understand what children are going through in terms of, if they're suffering depression or if they're suffering suicidal tendencies or ideation in any way. And one of those tools that we've been looking at from the Ohio Department of Education's website and some of the other agencies in the state is something called the Oh Yes survey. And this survey is developed by the state of Ohio. It's free to school districts, and it's not used necessarily by all districts in Ohio, but it collects information on family, school, and community environments, health and well-being, mental health, and substance use. And getting an understanding of where our students are, where our children are in terms of their behavioral and mental health will go a long way in terms of telling us what is needed in services, whether they be at school or in the community. So we are an organization, Children's Defense Fund, who relies heavily on data. And we believe that good policies and good practices and investments are driven by that data. So likewise, we would like to see more of this type of information collected and collected anonymously, obviously, to protect the privacy of children, but to get an understanding of what the community of that school needs. Now, a second piece is cultivating greater partnerships between schools and community behavioral health professionals. So Ohio is very fortunate to have supportive and collaborative leaders, not only at our state level with our policymakers, the Ohio Department of Education, OMAS, Medicaid, Job and Family Services, and of course from the administration, but we also have a strong history of local partnerships with our school communities, with our behavioral health boards and professionals. And so, especially right now during this time, there is a greater need to harness this and cultivate these partnerships to make sure that the needs of all children are being met. So, I started off with data, and now it's getting into, okay, what do we do with that information? So today we have models in our schools, and I'm sure you've all heard of them, right? The school-based health centers. Everyone, talks about the model in the Cincinnati schools with Euler Elementary School. And even with our mobile health vans, other community providers who are able to provide services in person in our schools, even without a school-based health center, or even today through telehealth with our students. This pandemic, though, has really uncovered a growing need for more of these partnerships, especially as we see that more children are experiencing behavioral health challenges, that have just been exacerbated by what they're experiencing right now in this time. So to activate these types of partnerships, one of the things that we've been very excited to see in this last biennium was the investment of $675 million for children's well-being that were included in the last budget. The student wellness and success funding, it really provides this opportunity to realize what we have known is needed. More services in the schools to meet those unique needs of our different communities, especially where, you know, a lot of our students were struggling and their families were struggling to find those services. So one of the things that we also were able to find was that this past December, an expenditure report of the Student Wellness and Success Funding was published by the Ohio Department of Education. And it gave us some real insights as to how those dollars were being used by school districts to meet needs. One of the interesting things that we found in those reports was that about 60% of school districts, 60% of the funding used by the school districts were for mental health services. And of course, this makes sense. You know, just reviewing some of the data that we've seen from the last 2 years, one of the things that we, and this is again from the OES survey from the 2018-19 school year before the pandemic, was about 30% of children who were surveyed experienced heightened levels of anxiety, warranting some type of mental health support. Another 1 in 4 students experiencing depression, another 1 in 4 students sharing that they felt sad or hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks. So these are situations that, you know, must be addressed because we know that, you know, physical health is important, you know, for a child to thrive and flourish. And mental health. So we must be tending to all of these and trying to be creative and, you know, supporting our families and our communities and how they're meeting those needs. You know, and I used to have a boss a long time ago who used to, you know, we did a lot of work in human capital development, and we had a saying, and he had a saying that you get hired on the hard skills and fired on the soft skills, and you know, which is absolutely true. And you know, some of the soft skills are really some of those behavioral health supports and how we cope with anxiety and how we cope, you know, and get and recognize in ourselves when we need additional help. So if nothing else, this is definitely an emerging workforce issue with so many of our students suffering in isolation at this moment. You know, we need to be cognizant of the fact that at some point in time, now or in the near future, they will need some behavioral health support in some way. And, you know, to some level, to some degree of let's see, some degrees, you know, greater than others. Lastly, and this is the last part of this section, is elevating access to behavioral and mental health care for children by creating a better workforce development pipeline. It has become incredibly clear in the last several years that, you know, we have significant shortages, depending, and some of those shortages are more significant than others, depending on where you are in the state, for behavioral and mental health services for children. You know, we've heard and read stories, all of us, and articles where families are struggling to get their children the help they need. And, you know, when they are able to access services and get, you know, the coverage that they need for it, sometimes the waits are, you know, incredibly long. And, you know, many families are seeking support in emergency rooms, unfortunately. So there's a couple different things that are going on in this state that we must all, I think, take a look at and, you know, try to emulate. First off, this is not the first time that Ohio has experienced, you know, shortage in a certain workforce. And we know how to do this. We know how to build our workforce development pipeline. And we do this through career pathways. We do this through loan forgiveness, apprenticeship programs, and other types of activities such as that. And currently the Ohio Department of Education is actually the recipient of a $2 million 5-year grant to work with school districts and Ohio's Appalachian region to build that behavioral health pipeline for that region. So as you can imagine, $2 million doesn't necessarily go far over 5 years when you're trying to build a pipeline. But what it does do is it gives us something to model from and to learn from and to emulate throughout the state. So I will end my presentation there. And I appreciate your attention. I appreciate all the work that you're doing on behalf of Ohio's children. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. So now I want to turn it over to Lynanne Gutierrez from Groundwork, Ohio.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Representative Russo and Senator Coonsey, and certainly Tracy, for your leadership of the children's budget. We are glad to be a partner, and as your first panelist, I get to focus on the earliest years in life, which is really what Groundwork Ohio does. So just so you know, I have a short 5 minutes with you here today, but I hope that we provide some high-level recommendations and inspire you to continue a conversation with us and our partners to problem solve about some really persistent and long-term problems that we have, and we want to be a partner with you in solving. We are the nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization. We were formed in 2004. So we've been around a little while, and we champion high quality early learning and healthy development strategies from the prenatal period to age 5 that lay a strong foundation for Ohio kids, families, and communities. Next slide. So our policy priorities really in that prenatal 5 scope of time span all state agencies, local agencies, and certainly in reflection of the vast needs of children in the different education and health and social determinants that really determine the trajectory of their life in this very critical period of time. So we know that 90% of brain development happens in the first 5 years of life, and indeed 80% in the first 3 years. And if we can get it right, if we can set a strong foundation, it sets them on a trajectory of lifelong success. And we enjoy working with partners across the child's life course to ensure that as we build out this strong, that it's supported throughout their life and as they transition into the various systems that we have set up to serve them. So these are our 3 main policy priority areas: healthy development, quality early learning, and empowered families. And so we just invite you to use us as a resource for any number of issues that you may be interested in. So I've been asked to talk about the continuum of care for moms and babies. Certainly can't do that in this short of time, but I want to call out a couple of key opportunities in this space. Certainly, many of you are very familiar with the fact that we are entrenched in an infant mortality and maternal mortality crisis in our state, certainly prior to COVID. And as the needs of families just mount greater and greater, we continue to be deeply concerned and really relentlessly committed to having a response that responds to the urgent need of not just keeping moms and babies alive, but really setting them up to thrive throughout their life. And the foundation of healthcare and of education really begins with health coverage. And we've identified the extension of postpartum coverage for our pregnant women who are covered under Medicaid is a key opportunity for growth in our state. So over half of all births in our state are covered by Medicaid, making Medicaid in our state the biggest payer of maternity care. And right now, women are only covered until 60 days after birth of their baby. And for those of you who are parents or certainly have young children in their families, that is a very short window of time that does not meet the needs of either moms or babies whose health and success are inextricably linked. So our ask for this budget is to maintain and expand the investment in extended postpartum coverage and actively pursue what we at this point in Ohio need to do in order to extend this coverage to 12-month period of time is to file a Section 1115 waiver with CMS, the Federal Medicaid Authority. We saw last budget that certainly the governor and the Department of Medicaid were ready to lead in this area and had planned on submitting that waiver and made an appropriate investment of state dollars to be able to draw down federal funds with upon the approval of a waiver. But as a result of COVID-19, that waiver submission has not been acted on at this point. And at a baseline, we really want to make sure that that limited scope of postpartum women with substance abuse disorders can be acted on, and we can make progress toward extending coverage for pregnant moms and Medicaid across the board, regardless of the conditions that they may come to us having. So with that in mind, it's our goal, certainly longer term, to expand the scope and investment of the waiver to include 12-month continuous care for pregnant women with all high-risk pregnancies, chronic conditions, and mental health diagnoses, and eventually to cover all of our women who are covered on Medicaid, because we really know that's what's required to meet their needs and their babies' needs. And as part of this, we hope to be a resource in monitoring federal action that may allow states to provide this extension of coverage without the red tape, if you will, of applying for a waiver. So there is significant opportunity with the new administration and the new Congress to get more resources and more policies coming to the state to allow this, to allow Ohio to make it an easier option and a more sustainable investment to extend coverage. Next slide. So certainly health coverage and the type of access to the clinical care that women and young children need is really foundational. We spend a lot of time at groundwork discussing those non-clinical interventions, which are so critical to our low-income families, to our at-risk families who have complex needs, who are dealing with many social and determinative factors in their lives that cannot be responded to in a clinical setting necessarily. And one of the evidence-based interventions that we talk a lot about is evidence-based home visiting and how we can empower families through evidence-based home visiting. So we, again, are thankful to the governor and to the Department of Health and certainly the Department of Medicaid in supporting the expansion of evidence-based home visiting in our state. The governor set out a bold goal last biennium to triple the number of families served in evidence-based home visiting. This is an evidence-based intervention that supports both mom and baby in their health, in their development through those earliest years of life. Many of us, including myself, have a network of support and family and others who were there to answer my call at 2 a.m. in the morning and be a resource to me when I had my first little one. And for our moms and babies that need additional supports and don't have those networks, this intervention really plays a critical role in really being a hand up into developing as a parent. So we, in this budget, are hoping that we will continue to build out the expansion of home visiting services. We're serving a little more than 1,000 children, I understand, at this point since the last historic investment, and we're looking to continue that trajectory of growth, which means maintaining that historic investment of $39 million annually and building upon that. Part of that for us is tracking how we can use state funds more efficiently as well. So how can we utilize Medicaid financing to support evidence-based home visiting? And how can we look to our state Family First Prevention Services Act plan to support evidence-based home visiting services for those children and families at risk of engaging in the child welfare system. And lastly, of course, no different with postpartum coverage or any of the policies groundwork would discuss with you, is that we really want to evaluate these programs, whether it's clinical or non-clinical interventions, from an equity lens and utilize data to make policy choices and investments that eliminate barriers to access and the impacts of COVID-19 based on race, rural geography, and certainly the age of the child. Sometimes our littlest ones need additional attention. Even within our prenatal to 5 scope, we often think about our infants and toddlers in a different way than we do our 4 and 5-year-olds even. So thanks for the opportunity, and please feel free to reach out to me and to our website and to our staff to support your work. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lynn Ann. And again, I just want to emphasize, just the incredible work that Groundwork Ohio and the incredible resource that they have been to me, and I know many others in this space. So I encourage, especially our new members, if you haven't had an opportunity to talk with them or utilize their resources, to do that. So next, we're going to turn it over to Will Petrick from Policy Matters Ohio, who's going to talk about funding for high quality childcare and early education in the state budget. And I'm going to challenge him to stick to about 5 minutes so we can get through to Scott tomorrow as well and have plenty of time for questions.
I will do my best. Thank you, Representative Rousseau, and thanks to everyone for joining us today and for all of your leadership and commitment to improving the lives of kids in Ohio. So Policy Matters Ohio is part of the Ohio Children's Budget Coalition because we believe that every child, regardless of race, class, zip code, deserves to be safe, cared for, and nurtured. And our mission is to build a more vibrant, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive Ohio. And again, my name is Will Petrick. So the lead slide was, it takes a village. You all might be familiar, it's an African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. And it basically means all of us, the entire community of people must interact with kids for our kids to experience and grow in a safe and healthy way. So, high quality childcare is a part of that and part of creating that village for kids and for parents. So, Lynn Ann talked about the early years and the brain development. So high quality childcare is so critical for supporting kids and making sure that they're ready to start kindergarten, ready to learn and grow. It's also really supportive for parents. We believe that all parents deserve to be a part of the workforce and be able to go to work knowing that their kids have a safe place to go. This is also, as Representative Rousseau said, it's a critical economic issue. So childcare is the workforce behind the workforce. So we really see this as a critical infrastructure piece, much like roads and bridges help our economy go. Childcare is also part of that, critical infrastructure. So, the context we're in this moment of a global pandemic. And I think it's important to note that even before COVID-19, the childcare industry was teetering and the pandemic has had a really disastrous effect. So again, even before the pandemic, childcare providers who are providing childcare for kids and families operated on very razor-thin margins. And like other businesses, due to COVID, many childcare providers have had to shut their doors or reduce their capacity. So a recent survey from the National Association for the Education of Young Children found that 81% of childcare providers are serving fewer kids than before the pandemic, and 91% of providers are paying more. So this just goes to show that childcare providers are seeing a pinch. We also know just from data from ODJFS that the publicly funded childcare program in Ohio, that's the state-funded program that helps support kids and parents with low income. That program served 24,500 fewer kids in August of 2020 compared to August of 2019. So that also shows the reduced capacity that we've seen and that some childcare providers have had to go out of business. Next slide. So what does this mean for kids, for families, for the economy? I think for kids, we know one of the biggest challenges of COVID is the loss of community and the loss of family support. Kids need other kids. Kids also need other adults. And these relationships enrich their lives and their experiences. So, less capacity has hurt our kids. Also going back to this thing we call kindergarten readiness. So this is a metric that we look at of how many kids in Ohio start kindergarten ready to learn and grow. In Ohio, only 26% of Black children start kindergarten ready to learn. And it's 41% of all kids. So only 41% of all Ohio's children are ready to learn and grow when they start. This is critical because one, we know that kids who start behind often stay behind. So again, we must provide more access to high quality childcare and high quality early education to make sure that when our kids start school, they're ready to engage and ready to participate. This has also, again, had a big impact on families. I know so many of you probably, either parents or grandparents, are stressed and exhausted, right? From struggling to work while also trying to take care of your kids. So we've seen this has had a disproportionate impact on women. So the National Women's Law Center show that more than 2 million women have left the workforce nationwide since the pandemic began. And we know, again, this helps, quality childcare helps parents stay in the workforce. So we cannot restart our economy until we address the childcare crisis and until we address COVID. Next slide. Two other big things I want to mention are the workforce and access and affordability. So this slide highlights the workforce. So again, before COVID, the childcare system has been built on a low-wage workforce of primarily women and disproportionately Black and brown women. So women make up 95% of the childcare workforce in Ohio and make an average of just $10.64 an hour. We see this work as essential. Again, it's loving and caring and teaching our kids and also helping parents stay in the workforce. These low wages really reflect how we as a state undervalue this work. So, it's up to all of us together to ensure that childcare workers make a living wage. Next slide, please. So this next slide, you may not be able to see it very well, but it basically highlights eligibility for publicly funded childcare. And Ohio is far over to the left. So basically Ohio's income limit right now is for initial eligibility for support for getting access to childcare is 130% of the federal poverty level. So for a family of three, and say a single mother of two, if she's earning $15 an hour, she actually makes too much to qualify for publicly funded childcare. And if she's, putting both of those kids in childcare, she's spending over half her income on childcare. So, that makes it very difficult to pay the rent, to pay for food, to pay for all these other needs for the family. So, I think one of the policy levers that lawmakers have is expanding initial eligibility for publicly funded childcare. So we're asking lawmakers to expand it to 200% of the federal poverty level. This chart is from 1999. We used to be better than Indiana and Michigan, and all the other states basically made it more accessible and more affordable for more families. We are now behind Michigan. This last year in Michigan's budget, they increased initial eligibility to 150%. So I know that's one of the things that Governor DeWine has expressed as a goal. And so we certainly hope you all see this as a real critical lever for helping expand access and expand affordability. Next slide. So to close, these are, again, some more policy levers that you all have an opportunity to change in the budget. And, if not us, who? If not now, when, right? All of this work is really, really critical. And we structure our culture, we structure our society, and lawmakers in particular can change the way how we structure the world for our kids and families. And we really want to make a real investment in the early years of the child's life. So, the big things for policy change are, one, expanding access and affordability. Again, we can help more parents get back to work. We can provide more high quality childcare for more kids and help more kids be ready to learn and grow. We can do that by expanding initial eligibility for publicly funded childcare from 130% to 200% of the federal poverty level. And just so you have context, 130% for a family of three is roughly $13 an hour. 150% is just less than $15 an hour. 200% is about $20 an hour for a family of three. Two, we need sustainability, right? With the whole childcare crisis and the system being there's a threat. A lot of childcare providers are going out of business. So, we need to make sure there's an ongoing investment and make sure that, kids, families, and childcare staff can remain safe and healthy and have those options. Quality is another critical piece. We need quality to ensure that kids can thrive. Another part of quality is the childcare workforce and making sure they're paid a living wage. Finally, equity is a critical issue. So there have been long-standing structural barriers and public policy choices that have kept kids from following their dreams. And the state budget is an opportunity to put kids first and specifically make targeted investments in kids and families who have been excluded. This means investing in Black and Brown Ohioans, in rural Ohioans, and our youngest Ohioans. And Lynn Ann also mentioned we need to evaluate all of this work through an equity lens as well. So again, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Will Petrick, and we have here just my contact info if you have any questions. Also encourage you all to talk to your families. If you want to learn more about what people are going through, please talk to families about their struggles and hopes. And with that, I just want to reiterate, it takes a village. It's up to all of us. And I'll pass it back to Representative Russo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. And thank you for talking about this critically important topic. I know many parents in my district, and I know many of your districts, this has been something that I probably have heard the most about throughout this pandemic, and certainly as a parent myself of very young children is something I've personally experienced as well. So next we are going to turn it over, last but not least, to Scott Demaro, who is president of the Ohio Education Association. And he is going to talk about school funding, a huge topic, small amount of time, but I know that he is always accessible to all of us if we have any follow-up questions or conversation we want to have about this issue. So Scott, please.
Thank you very much, Representative Russo. And I am going to cover the incredibly complex issue of school funding in 5 minutes or less. But the advantage on this one is that we know that there are many people on this call who have a lot of expertise on this issue. Representative Russo, Senator Coonsey, Representative Manchester, Senator Sykes, appreciate your leadership of this caucus. Senator Sykes, just want to call you out in particular. You're one of the lead co-sponsors of the Senate version of the Fair School Funding Plan in the last General Assembly. And I know many of you supported this legislation in the House. And so I want to just remind everybody about what the Fair School Funding Plan was all about, what our school funding priorities are. As we think about that continuum, infants and young children, we think about kids in our pre-K through 12 system and just how much of an impact schools have on our children's lives. This pandemic has reminded us that it's not just about academic learning. Schools play such a critical role in the lifeblood of our communities. We know that parents and families depend on strong schools, not just to help their kids learn, support the social and emotional, mental health and behavioral health needs of students. We really are all about meeting the needs of the whole child. We have unfortunately not had a functional school funding formula in decades. And the Fair School Funding Plan that was embedded in House Bill 305 and Senate Bill 376 finally gave us a path to constitutionality. It invests $1.99 billion in new funding in state aid for public education over the next 6 years. And this is a plan that was developed by people on the ground who work in schools, treasurers, superintendents, board members, educators from across the state, developed in a bipartisan way over a long period of time, and endorsed broadly OEA and OFT and management organizations, because this is a plan that finally creates a student-centered approach that is predictable and fair, and most importantly, equitable and adequate. We're looking for two things out of a school funding formula. Number one, identify the costs of a high quality education. And number two, figure out a fair way to distribute those costs between the state and local communities. Next slide, please. So as we look at the Fair School Funding Plan, several key pieces. Number one, it does reduce the need for local levies. It removed all but 9 districts, and those are really kind of unusual situations out of the over 600 districts across the state, from the guarantee and eliminates gain caps. In the current budget, virtually every single district in the state is either on a cap or on a guarantee. It directs approximately 70% of all new revenue to the poorest districts. So there is a real focus on equity. And very significantly, and this is a point of growing consensus, both among Democrats and Republicans in the House, and Senate President Huffman has also said that direct funding of charter schools and vouchers is important. And we believe it's very important because it allows school districts and local taxpayers to focus their locally generated revenues on their public schools, and doesn't pit public versus private in the way that the current system does. Next slide, please. As I indicated, this new school funding plan shifts the burden away from local property taxpayers. Since the last DeRolf decision nearly 20 years ago, we have seen a 24% increase in property tax rates across the state of Ohio, when you're looking at in terms of the number of mills. Local school districts have had to go back to their local communities very frequently for levies because the state funding formula just hasn't been adequate to meet the needs of our students. And so that exacerbates inequality, and it also creates a lot of tension and limits our ability to serve the needs of our students. Next slide. When we look at how the funding formula and the runs were done, you can see that every single category of school districts, and this is based on typologies used all the time by the Department of Education, embedded in law, used for analytical purposes all the time by policymakers, that every category of school districts will benefit from the new school funding formula. But particularly, you'll see that higher poverty districts benefit the most. And we know that Governor DeWine has made a priority of making sure that we're directing the resources where they're needed the most. Communities of color and communities where you have concentrations of students in poverty. One more slide. So as we think about our priorities, what we need is to make sure that we have a system that is sustainable. Now the plan that passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, 87-9 in December in the House of Representatives. And again, thanks to every single one of you on this call who supported that. By no means is a perfect plan. Nobody's ever suggested it, but it is by far and away the best plan that has been devised since the Supreme Court ruled in 1997 that our system is unconstitutional. And in order to continue to make it better, it funds studies to improve funding and look at education outcomes for students in poverty, students with special needs, students in our rural districts, our English learner students. It creates a funding oversight committee to make recommendations to policymakers on modifications and adjustments to the formula moving forward. Creates a permanent school fund for long-term funding stability. And I think this is important, especially right now. We know that we have an influx of federal dollars really targeted towards addressing emergency needs tied to the pandemic, making sure that our schools are safe. We know that there has been a disproportionate impact of the pandemic on students of color, on students in high poverty communities. We're anticipating an influx of federal dollars. We're hoping that the president and Congress are going to be able to get together on a new aid package that's being debated in DC right now. So that allows us to deal with some of these short-term needs. A fair school funding plan is what's needed for the long haul to make sure that we have a sustainable system of funding our schools. And I think very importantly, and it was Tracy talked about it earlier in the webinar, that the governor's student wellness and success funds, those are embedded into the formula. We wholeheartedly agree, and this is one of the reasons I think why OEA and all the other members of the Children's Budget Caucus are in alignment on this, because we know that, again, it's not just about academic needs. It's not just about how you measure success based on test scores. It's all about supporting the social, emotional, the mental health needs, the behavioral health needs, the nutritional needs of our students across the board. We know that our system has some deep levels of inequity. The pandemic has exposed that, has exacerbated that. A fair school funding plan is a way to address that for the long term. So thank you for the opportunity to share a summary, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Scott. I know we will be spending hours upon hours talking about this issue in the upcoming budget process. And for those members of the House and House staff, I do want to give a quick plug. What was formerly House Bill 305, the Cupp-Patterson bill, is out right now for a co-sponsorship request. Representatives Jamie Callender and Bride Sweeney are now the joint sponsors of that. So I would encourage you, if you want to join as a co-sponsor, that is out currently. And I think the deadline's coming up quickly on that. So, and maybe our senators can say whether or not the companion legislation has been dropped on the Senate side. But I do want to open it up for questions or comments for our members. You just simply take yourself off of mute. You can ask any question to any of our panelists, and want to make sure we give time for that. And there's quite a bit of conversation going on in the chat as well, and some good resources there. I see, while we wait for a couple of questions, I see we have Senator Sykes on. Senator Sykes, has the companion legislation on the Senate side for the Fair School Funding Plan, will that be dropped soon, or is it out for co-sponsor as well?
Our strategy is to concentrate on the House because you've done such a great job with the overwhelming bipartisan support. We'd like to use that momentum to help us in the Senate. So we want to first focus on the House. And so we don't want to take the spotlight off of you all.
Great, thank you, Senator Sykes. I see Representative Lightbody, you have your hands raised for comment.
I do, thanks. I am pleased to be here today. And again, thanks to you and Senator Kunze and the others for getting the ball rolling again so early in this GA. I look forward to additional webinars in the future. I wanted to make sure that you all knew that I have the legislation ready to drop, or ready to send out to co-sponsors to do the increase the federally funded cutoff for childcare to 200%. Don't know if we're going to make it, but that bill, the legislation is ready to roll. I'm looking at the moment for a joint sponsor, and then we'll be looking for co-sponsors come probably Monday, and then it'll be coming along. So we're working on it. Very much want to make sure that we can give the children the head start they need. As one of the panelists mentioned, when the kids start behind in kindergarten, they stay behind. And so if we can help them work on the significant activities during those early years that boost their brains and retain those neurons, all to the better. And we'll fight hard, but certainly would appreciate people who are interested contacting my office. I'm Rep 19 at ohiohouse.gov to sign up to help me get that bill pushed through.
Thank you, Rep Lightbody. I see that we have Representative Troy. Your hand is up as well.
Hi. Yeah, the question I have is, having not been there for the debate on House Bill 305, and obviously there'll be a successor bill being introduced soon. Depending on who I talk to, the actual price tag on that, what are we looking at in terms of dollar amounts to really fulfill everything that we want to do in House Bill 305? And then I guess how many successive biennial budgets are we going to need to probably get there?
I can address it a little. It's about $2 billion, and we're looking at a 6-year phase in. So 3 general assemblies to phase it in.
Okay, because yeah, and thank you, Senator. Yeah, and you know from experience, the problem sometimes is you do those long range projections on how we're going to fully fund this. Something often comes up to distract the General Assembly, maybe a recession or some other need. And they say, well, we're just gonna kick that can down the road. So I'm hopeful that the discipline is here this time to say, if we're gonna make a 6-year, 3 biennial budget commitment, somehow do whatever we can to make sure that there's some stick-to-itiveness to get it finally done this time.
Well, as you know, we can't obligate any future General Assemblies, but you're going to be around for a while, and I'm sure you're going to be able to hold them to the fire.
Okay, yeah, God willing.
I see Scott is trying to add a little bit here as well.
Yeah, if I could just add, we think that it's critically important that, and while we appreciate and completely support the legislation that is being introduced on a standalone basis, we really want to see this embedded into the budget. We know President Huffman has said that he would like to see this embedded in the budget. And so as this moves forward, I think that's critical. And then the other issue is getting the formula is the critical first step. And then, of course, it's going to be up to this General Assembly and future General Assemblies to make sure that the resources go along with that. But having that formula in place is so critical because that is the foundational building block to having a constitutional system as we move forward.
Thank you, Scott. I want to give one more question to Representative Lepore-Hagan, and I think that's the time that we have today, and then we'll have a couple of closing remarks.
Thank you, Rep. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Michelle Lepore-Hagan. I represent the 58th District, which is Youngstown, Camel, Struthers, Coatesville, Lowellville, and Austintown. And in the middle of my district are the Youngstown City Schools. And I just want to thank you, everyone that's presented today, because you totally have our back and you're helping us. I represent a school district that's been in a state takeover now for 6 years. And it's so ironic because the original version of HB 70, the original bill, dealt with all of these issues of poverty and how to take care of our children with wraparound services. And it was referenced and modeled after the Euler School. And I am so sad to say that in the last 6 years and before that with other forms of state takeovers, we've lost a generation of children. And for us to really get a grip on it, it has to start in our public schools. It has to start with our public education and very, the very earliest stages. And I don't know if we need, I guess my question is, how do we address, putting an emphasis back on local control and wraparound services and everything that the original House Bill 70 bill was embracing. And so thank you so much. If you have any ideas or suggestions on that, I think that's our solution in a lot of ways.
Do any of our panelists want to take a stab at that?
Are you talking about the question about the CARES Act?
Representative Lepore-Hagan, I guess I'm reading your comment as talking about the importance of giving kids the support they need across the continuum, as opposed to a punitive approach that basically takes authority away from local school boards and people in communities, as we see with the House Bill 70. And again, we've said that we appreciate that the House has acted in a broad bipartisan fashion to move forward in repealing that state takeover law. We hope that is something that this General Assembly will do in both the House and the Senate, working with the governor, because yes, we need to lift people up rather than punishing people by taking their voice away. The question is, how do we best get there? And we think that repealing that state takeover law is an important first step.
Great.
Representative, I
Okay.
know this isn't necessarily directly responding to your question, but I was just going to encourage, as you all problem solve the K-12 school funding issue, and we're really solving these broader problems across the continuum of kids' lives, to please consider how to engage early childhood educators and professionals who are in community-based settings for the most part, because working families need childcare beyond school day, right? And to view them as really partners in your local communities and with your local school boards, and certainly across the state, because they have so much to offer, and we know, especially in this pandemic, they're critical both to the K-12 system and to our economy and to the communities they work in. So I just had to point that out for us coming from the early end of the spectrum.
Thank you, Lynn. That's an important point to make. Well, I just want to say, and I'll let Senator Kunze have the last word here, but I do want to say thank you to all of our panelists. You know, while we could probably spend hours, and we'll spend hours talking about each of these issues and topics, it was great to have this broad overview. And I would like to thank the members who have joined us and your staff who have joined us today, and really want to turn it over to my co-chair, Senator Kunze, to have the last word here.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Russo, to you and to your staff as well for hosting such a wonderful kickoff to this 134th General Assembly Children's Caucus. And thank you again to the panelists and to all the legislators who participated. And we do look forward to continuing these very important discussions as we give voice for Ohio's children. So thank you all. Have a great weekend and be well.